Hello, my name is Jacob Hunter, and today we'll be learning a little bit about soil invertebrates, but more specifically, we'll be learning about earthworms, which is a type of soil invertebrate. So to start off, what is a soil invertebrate? A soil invertebrate is an invertebrate that spends all or most of its life in soil. If you look at the picture to the right from researchgate.net, you can see that there is an earthworm, an ant, a ground beetle, millipede, slug, a mite. So a lot of these are pretty common insects that a lot of us can easily run into every day. Like if you were to go outside, you'd probably see, or there's a decent chance that you could see a slug or a millipede, an ant, all common. So a lot of soil invertebrates are constantly around us all the time, and we have no idea. There are many different types of soil invertebrates all around the world. Like for obviously to the right, there's a whole bunch of different types, and that's just not even covering the base of them. There are so many. So many soil invertebrates are crucial to the health of soil and plants. An earthworm is a soil invertebrate, like I talked about earlier, that we are going to be looking at more specifically. So let's start off by the taxonomy of earthworms. An earthworm belongs to the Animalia kingdom. Their phylum is the Annelida. Their class, Clitellata. The order is Haplotaxida or Lumbriculida. Their family, excuse me if I don't pronounce this correctly, their family is the Acanthrodrillidae, all the way through the Sparaginophilidae. Their genus and species is the Lumbricus. So, if you want to look at the picture to the right that I provided from ecowatch.com, you can see just your common earthworm in its habitat, which appears to be some moist and damp soil. So we're going to take a closer look at the habitat of earthworms. In general, earthworms prefer to live in moist soil and others in mud. The moist soil helps the earthworms navigate through soil a lot easier. Their bodies have evolved that way to allow them to go through soil with no problem, especially moist soil. Like if they were trying to go through some, hard and dense soil, it probably wouldn't go as well. It's just not the way they have evolved. And then mud is obviously pretty wet and damp as well. So that allows them to travel through that pretty easily. Earthworms are pretty common. They can be found in the soil of like your backyard. If you were to go outside and dig up for an earthworm, I'm sure eventually you could probably find one. Or they can be found in soil near bodies of water. Like I said, moist and anything damp, any damp or moist soil is a great spot for them. It allows them to easily navigate through the soil. And this is a fact that I thought was pretty interesting. In tropical regions, earthworms can be found in soil on tree branches, which I always thought that earthworms, were probably in the ground. Like you'd see them above the ground sometimes, but mostly they spent their time underground. But it turns out that they can actually be in soil on tree branches. A lot of earthworms live in topsoil, while others live deeper in the soil, like really deep. And of course, the earthworms that can be found on tree branches. Like I said, earthworms are pretty common. They can be found almost anywhere in the world, except for areas that don't have a lot of soil, like deserts, polar regions, or areas with very acidic soil. So I guess the level of acidity matters to worms or earthworms. They can't be in areas with very high acidic soil because they just can't. They're not suitable to live in those conditions. So that's why they're found more commonly through like your backyard or anything like that. The diet of an earthworm is actually pretty large. They're omnivores. So there's two different ways we can look at this. You have the earthworms that are in the soil at the time and they just eat whatever they can find around them. But or like rarely earthworms will go above the ground and they can also find some food out there. So we're going to look at if the earthworms are in the soil already, what they can eat around them. Decaying roots is a good one for them to eat. That can be like roots decaying off any trees or any small plants. They will go for that. Decomposing leaves is also another big one, especially around this time of the year. You'll have leaves falling like crazy. Eventually they'll start to decay and decompose, and their nutrients will go through the soil and be there for the earthworms to digest. Plant materials that naturally occur in soil, algae, fungi, and bacteria, they can also eat those. So now we're going to look at if the earthworms, are above the soil, because they do go above the soil sometimes. They can just straight up eat dead grass or even leaves. So it doesn't have to be decomposing leaves. It can just be straight leaves falling from the trees. And they'll also eat fruits, berries, or vegetables, which is kind of interesting to me. So now we're going to look at the reproduction of earthworms. So like in most animals, not in most animals, but commonly in animals, you'll see the male has a sex organ that can produce sperm, while the female has a sex organ that can produce eggs. And also, it's a two-partner reproduction. You need a male and you need a female. Not asexually, they need another partner with them. During the mating process, the female and male worm will lay inverted of each other so the sperm can be exchanged. If you take a closer look to the image to the right, you can see the female and male worm laying kind of horizontally right up next to each other. So them being that close will allow the sperm to be exchanged, and that process actually goes on for quite a while. And then eventually, once it's done, the female will lay eggs and they'll hatch around 3 weeks. So like I said, the image to the right, you can really see how close the earthworms are to each other. That image is from sanctuarysoil.com. And then once that whole process is done, they will lay the eggs and eventually they will hatch into earthworms. We're going to look at earthworms' evolutionary adaptations. So there's different types. There's a whole bunch of different types of evolutionary adaptations that animals can go through. There's physical, there is psychological adaptations, but we're going to be looking at the physical adaptations of earthworms specifically. So earthworms, like I've said many times, they live in the soil. So obviously their evolutionary adaptations are going to help them thrive in the soil because that's where they live. And these 4 facts that I pulled were from sciencelearn.org. So if you look at a worm, they have little segments on their bodies, and each of those segments contains tiny hairs called setae that allows them to easily move through soil. So this is a big thing for earthworms to have this adaptation because they're obviously in soil a lot. They live there, so they have to be able to navigate through. I'm sure the moist soil helps, like I said, but these little tiny hairs are also a big factor in helping them navigate. If we go back to this image, you can see the shape of an earthworm is very streamlined, and that's also very important in helping them navigate through soil. An earthworm has muscles that surround each body segment to help them move. So again, these are a lot of adaptations about helping them move through soil, which is important, obviously. They have to go out and get their food and reproduce and all that kind of stuff. And then this one is very interesting. An earthworm will push its pharynx, which is basically like the throat of an earthworm. It'll push its own throat out of its mouth to grab its food. So once it has a hold on it, it'll pull it back into its mouth and wet it with saliva so it can easily go down, which is kind of strange. So the ecological significance of earthworms. Earthworms fall into the category of decomposers, which are very important to the food chain because it recycles energy. And then earthworms are heterotrophs because they get all their nutrients from or by consuming other organisms. So they're not autotrophs. They need other organisms to consume to get their nutrients. And then the human impacts on earthworms. The quality and the amount of nutrients in our soil is very much reliant on earthworms. And if we treat our soil badly, we can mess up the earthworms' habitat, and then they won't be able to enrich our soil at all. So it's very important that we keep these animals or earthworms protected. That is all I have, but if you're interested on learning any more about earthworms or the way they, affect the environment and why it's important to keep them, here are some of the links I have listed below. Thank you for your time.